Hi, Eric here. Welcome to today's True Mystery Stories from MrE. Today's story starts back in March 1st, 1998. This story takes place in Moncton, New Brunswick, which is in eastern Canada. Police are called to the home of Joan Hicks. Joan had recently moved to Moncton. Her and her 11-year-old daughter had moved from Newfoundland so Joan could be closer to her pen pal, who was in prison for murdering his wife. Joan really truly believed in giving people second chances. That's the type of person she was. Joan really didn't know too many people in Moncton since she was a new resident. She did have one friend. The friend's name was Tammy McLean. She was a 22-year-old girl who hung out with Joan once in a while, and mostly just hung out with Joan so Tammy could complain about her boyfriend because he was not a very good guy. Well, on February 28th in 1998, Tammy was at Joan's house, and they were chatting, having conversations, and she was there late into the evening, and Tammy's boyfriend called her and said that he was coming over. So he took a cab over to Joan's house. When he got to Joan's house, he told his girlfriend to get into a cab and to go home. And he had showed up with a friend, and he puts his Tammy into the cab and takes off, and the two men stay behind. Well, 8 o'clock the next morning, a man walks into the Moncton Police Department and says that he has witnessed a murder and starts to tell the police about the murder of Joan Hicks, that he saw the whole thing. And police were like stunned, so they go to Joan's apartment. They find Joan, and while they're looking around, they also find Joan's 11-year-old daughter deceased as well. And so they asked this man, they're like, your friend here that you showed up here with last night, what's his name? And the man says that his buddy's name was Michael Wayne McGray. Police say, okay, well, you know where he lives? And this guy says, yeah, and he tells the police. So police go to McGray's house, and they arrest him without incident. They go pick him up. He's home. They pick him up. They bring him to the police station. And while he's in the police station, they're asking him about the situation with Joan's murder, and he confesses. So while the police are investigating McGray, they look into his past, and they discover that this man has a very, very troubled past. It started in childhood. He was in and out of trouble always. Apparently, he was beaten quite often by his father, and that trouble followed him into adulthood. He was mostly robberies. Specifically, back in 1987, he was convicted of robbery, where him and two associates planned to rob a cab driver, and in the process, one of his associates got stabbed and died during this blotched robbery. It turns out that things didn't work out the way they wanted to. One of the men had stabbed their associate who died, and they really couldn't figure out which person was the one that stabbed their friend. The police couldn't prove either way. They went to court. They couldn't convict either man of murder, but they did convict each man of assault with a deadly weapon, and both were sentenced to 5 years in prison. That's just one of the many robbery convictions that McGray had throughout his lifetime. And so back to the police station. While the police are investigating him and looking into his history and see what he's all about, and they're asking him about Joan's murder, he confesses to 2 other murders. He says that back in, I'm trying to think of the date now. I think it was October. Oh yeah, that's right. It was October in 1991. McGray was in prison at the time. He was let out for 3 days. He got a 3-day pass. And when he got out, he went to Montreal, and he had to check into a halfway house there. He checked in the halfway house, and then he left the house that night, and he went out. And that night he went out, and he picked up a man, and had some drinks with this guy, went back to this guy's house, and then brutally murdered him and stabbed him repeatedly. And a couple nights later, he did the exact same thing. Went out, found another man, went back to his apartment. They had some drinks, and for some reason, McGray snapped and murdered viciously, stabbing repeatedly this man. And he admits to both of these murders to the police. So he also admits to Joan's murder, but he refuses to admit to Joan's daughter Nina's murder. Apparently, he doesn't want to be labeled a child murderer. Apparently in prison that's not a good label to have. So he doesn't admit to the death of Nina at all. But he does also confess to the murder of a woman, a 17-year-old woman named Gail Tucker, back in 1985, 15 years previous to him killing Joan. He says he picked up a hitchhiker and murdered her. And he'd give enough evidence to support the evidence that the police had that they could actually close that case after almost 16 years. So McGray ends up getting 5 life sentences. And on his way to jail, so he's going to jail, and while he's in the car being transferred to prison, he tells the transfer guard that he's killed at least another 11 people, like all across Canada and even into the United States in the Seattle, Washington area. He says he's killed more. And at this point, the police don't really care. They got him 5 life sentences. They don't really do much. But the McGray, because he doesn't get the attention that he wants, he ends up going to the media and stirs up a bunch of media attention so he can claim all those lives. And there's a little bit more to the story that police really didn't follow up on because they had enough on to put him away for life, and the media just was looking for, I don't know, to sell some papers, but it never really went too far. At the end of the day, it was like really just McGray said that he just felt the compulsion to murder people, and it really wasn't anything personal. He just felt the need to kill, and when the situations came up, that's what he did. I just want to say that, you know, this man's a horrible man and he's in prison. But as far as Joan and Nina, they did not deserve what happened to them. They were, you know, courageous women who moved to a new city to start a new life, and only to have it taken away by a monster is just cruel. And as far as the family, I don't know, you know, what it's worth, but as far as the family of that 17-year-old girl, Gail Tucker, who was kidnapped and murdered in 1985, at least now, like after 16 years, the family had some sort of closure that somebody was brought to justice, and they could finally put it to rest, that knowing that the killer is finally been caged now. And interestingly enough, while I was researching this story, I came upon the name of a man called Glenn Assoon. I think that's how you pronounce it. And Glenn Assoon was also a man in Canada who had been charged with murdering his wife, Brenda Way. This was back in 1995. And he ended up serving 17 years in prison for the murders of his wife, but he always adamantly denied that he had anything to do with her death. He always said he was innocent, always. And he ended up going through writing to a bunch of people, to the innocent programs. I forget what it's called at the moment. But it turns out that after 17 years, he was actually finally exonerated of that murder. It took that long, unfortunately, because he did defend himself in court, which really wasn't helpful. But after 17 years, they exonerated him. And the new evidence that really helped exonerate him from his wife's murder was the fact that evidence now pointed towards Michael McGray as the actual murderer of his wife and not necessarily Glenn Assoon. And so I'm going to do another story on Glenn and his whole story, because that's a weird story as well. And so check out that. I'm going to put a link down in the description to that story so you can hear all about that, the connection between these two stories. Thanks for watching today's story, the True Mystery Stories, and come back. As always, thanks for watching.